first question is, where is our organisation's data? Who owns it and how important is it to the business? The most important thing for a board is to understand their data. What data do they have? Why is it important to them? And why might it be important to other people? And so if you're thinking, for example, you're a company that is taking chest x-rays and you're storing those chest x-rays of your clients, one value of those chest x-rays might be to a cyber thief is an application for residency in the United States. If you've got TB and you can steal someone else's x-ray, you can successfully apply for a visa into the United States. You need to be able to think about the data that you own. Why would it be valuable to somebody else? The second question, is cybersecurity treated as an enterprise-wide risk management issue, not just an IT issue? One of the dangers of technology is you think, gee, this is important, and focusing just on the technology. But when you think about cybersecurity, it is so much about culture. It's about people's behaviour. What information do they share and when do they share it? And if your board is finding that you're seeing cybersecurity purely as a technology-focused issue, you should be very worried. Cybersecurity needs to be seen as a whole of company issue. You need to think about what are the points of entry. What are the things that, think about phishing attacks. If someone is about to do a financial transaction and the finance director is flying to another country to conclude that transaction, and one of his direct reports gets an email and says, hey, look, I need 50 million transferred into this account. How could someone know that? Well, if you've got a Facebook account, if you've got a LinkedIn account and you say, I'm off to Hong Kong today. If someone has been tracking your movements and tracking your company and they know that there's something in the wings, they can then get lucky and they send the right email with the right tone to an underling who transfers $50 million into a cyber criminal's bank account. The third question is, does the board understand the legal implications of cyber risks as they relate to their company's context? When you look at what a board is faced with cybersecurity, is that it is both complex and complicated. And there's difference. A complex system can be made up of just simple parts, or it can have a few parts that are really complicated. Quantum mechanics is really complicated. Schrodinger's wave equation is difficult to solve. But as a board, you need to look at each of these separate parts, because most of the issues around cybersecurity are made up of identifiable and understandable smaller components. And the board needs to ask a lot of penetrating questions to be able to understand that we have a handle on all of the complex nature of cybersecurity. The fourth question, does the board have adequate access to cybersecurity expertise? And are discussions about cyber risk and management given regularly and adequate time on the board's meeting agenda? When you look at what expertise a board needs to have access to, if we're dealing with finance, and I ask the board, do we really have faith that we've got a good chief financial officer? Almost every single board that I know can judge that perfectly well. But if I twist that and say, your chief security officer, have you got a good one or not? Have you got a good CIO? Have you got a good chief technology officer? Most boards would be a little bit uncomfortable. They would be concerned that they don't have the right skills to do that. And so a board, if they are uncomfortable, needs to reach out to other boards. They need to talk to other company directors and say, how did you get to grips with understanding, have you got a good chief security officer? You need to go to your advisors and be able to get them to work with the board. You need to go on site visits to other companies in similar fields to your own. Find out how are they relating to their technical teams, and are they able to ask the right questions. One of the things that I keep saying to boards when I meet with them is that we not only have to ask a list of questions, we've actually got to understand how to process the answers. And if we've got more questions to ask after we've got those answers, we should start to feel a little comfortable. But if we just have to accept at face value any of the answers to the questions we ask, we should feel very, very uncomfortable. Question 5 is, are cyber risks included in terms of which risks are to be avoided, accepted, mitigated, or transferred through insurance, and are there specific plans associated with each of those approaches? And so the board has to turn its attention. Well, we've asked all these questions, we've dug really deep. What do we do? And you really need to understand what actions can you take? What cyber risks can you avoid? You need to ask, well, if we can't avoid these risks, what's the appropriate insurance that we need to take out to be able to protect the company if those risks do eventuate? A good example of boards deciding about how to insure or how to mitigate a risk would be to look back 10 years ago, how the banks first looked at credit card fraud. When you looked at 10, 15 years ago, it was cheaper for the banks to write a cheque, than to build complex, very expensive systems to stop the cyber fraud. It was cheaper to just write a cheque. But those cheques have been getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And probably 5 or 8 years ago, banks started to realise very soon it was going to be cheaper to actually not just put a perimeter fence around and stop people getting in, but to build systems that constantly trawled through their systems to make sure that even when someone got in, that they were able to detect that there was a threat within the systems and be able to deal with it. Question number 6 is, when was the last security audit or assessment done? Probably the first question a board should ask is, when was the last time we conducted a security audit? And the immediate follow-up question should be, what did that audit tell us that we needed to do? And then the follow-up question to that is, have we done everything that we said we would do to address the issues of that security report? Question 7 is, are you confident the team has corrected any of the findings that were identified from those reports? And so once the board understands what the executive have actually done to solve cybersecurity problems, they then need to start to ask questions. How confident are we that what management has done has actually fixed the problem? So boards need to be able to ask for real evidence that things have not just been checked in a checkbox, but the actual actions are implemented and that the results are starting, the data flow is starting to give us confirmation that they've fixed the real problem. Question 8 is, have you assessed information security risks and developed a plan to treat information security risks? Once the cybersecurity risk report is understood by the board needs to really look at what plans are actually in place. Do we understand how we're going to deal with each of those risks? What are the mitigating strategies for those risks that need to be addressed? And have they got a plan in terms of ensuring those risks that are really important to the company but cannot be mitigated? Question number 9 is, have you selected and implemented relevant controls to manage those unacceptable risks? Nassim Taleb wrote a great book about black swan risks. These are risks that are so devastating, but they're very, very unlikely. But if they do happen, the chances are the company will be destroyed. So a board needs to understand what are those very big risks and how can they be addressed? What are the things that the company needs to do to be able to survive a black swan risk? And the last question I would ask is, do company directors insert themselves into security discussions regularly, and do they ask for regular updates from their C-level executives? If the board's starting to feel comfortable that we're on top of this cybersecurity thing, I would ask each of the board members, when was the last time that you walked around and talked to some of the technologists about cybersecurity? How comfortable did you feel when the conversation got into a little bit of detail? You know, were you able to ask questions? Did you find the experience pleasant? Did you find the experience affirming? And that's when I think most boards will start to feel a little bit uncomfortable, and they should.